Hi there. This is the Zoom Basics presentation for our at-home retreats at Southern Dharma. We would encourage you to also print out the instructions that we've provided along with this video so that you can then use them on a Zoom call with someone else and actually try them out so that you make sure that you feel comfortable with them before the retreat. And of course, you can always get in touch with us if you're having a very specific issue and you need a little bit more support. So I'm going to share my screen with you and go over to my presentation. All right. Well, we're looking forward to having you on an upcoming at-home retreat with Southern Dharma, which is a really powerful experience if you allow it to be, even though it may seem a little unfamiliar using the online platforms. So let's start with the basic controls. If you move your mouse a little bit, or you just touch your screen, depending on which device you're using, you'll notice that a control bar pops up somewhere. And that has a lot of the key controls on it that you'll need for a Southern Dharma retreat. The most important one being the mute and unmute icon. You click that to either mute or unmute yourself at any time. And when you're muted, you'll see that that turns red and it has a red line going through it. And then with the next button over, which looks like a film camera, that's how you start and stop your own video image. And so when you stop your video image, no one is able to see your video at all. The participants button is important, and we'll go over that in just a second because you'll be able to rename yourself there as well as raising your hand when you need to. And then the little speech bubble is for the chat window where text messages are entered. And then all the way on the right, you'll have something that says either, leave session or leave meeting or end meeting. And that's where you click to get out. So let's come back to the participants button for a moment to talk about how you go about renaming yourself. And you may want to rename yourself because, for example, you're using your partner's account and it's not your name showing up on the screen, or because it still says, iPad 7230. And we appreciate it when people can actually take the time to rename themselves with their first name and maybe their last initial, because it helps the teachers keep track of who you are if you raise your hand and they'd like to call on you. So, feel free to rename yourself on the fly in any session that you're in. If you'd like to change it permanently, you're going to need to go into your settings on the Zoom web page and actually change your name for good, in which case it'll just come up every time as that new name. So to rename yourself on the fly during a session, you click on this participants button, and then you find your own name in the list of participants. So you may have to scroll a bit depending on how many people are on the call. And when you hover your cursor over your name, or perhaps you touch your name on the screen, again, it depends on what device you're using, you'll notice that you'll get these buttons that kind of appear, and one of which will say More and has a drop-down menu associated with it. So if you click on the More button, you'll see that one of your options there is to rename yourself. Another important function that you will need to know how to use for the retreat is the hand raising, the electronic hand raising. So we really prefer it when participants do not simply wave their physical hands on the screen and then expect that the Southern Dharma staff or that the teachers will see them, because it happens that we'll have people on more than one screen for the teacher, so they can't necessarily see everyone at the same time. So if people default to using their physical hands, then they tend to privilege those who they can see on the screen versus those that they cannot at that particular moment. So please do make use of the electronic hand raising function. And the way you do that is you click again on participants unless that window is already open for you. And then you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the participants list. And then you'll see that there are a number of buttons there, depending on, whether you're the host of the session like us or whether you're just a participant. But one of them will say raise hand. And you can also find raise hand in the control bar. Please do remember to lower your hand when you've been called on. That makes it easier for the teachers to keep track of who needs to be called on next. Okay, the next thing is kind of how you're viewing the people on the screen with whom you are participating in this retreat. And you have two options there. One is speaker view and the other is gallery view. And those can be selected right on the screen there in the control bar or in the upper right hand corner of your screen. It depends again on which device you're using and which version of the application you have. So you'll see somewhere on the screen there, speaker view and gallery view. So speaker view, as you know, you can see here in this little screenshot from the Lama Rod Owens retreat, allows you to see the main speaker, usually the teacher, in a large box on the screen versus the small ones that are then for some of the other participants and the Southern Dharma staff. And this is a great way to maintain your focus on the teacher during the sessions rather than kind of scanning around all the time to try to see what other people are doing. Who are the participants. But at other times, you might find it helpful and interesting to use gallery view and be able to see people tiled on the screen, for example, during a group meditation period. One thing we want everybody to understand is that it's optional to make use of video, although the teachers generally prefer that you have your video on when you're present at a session. It just kind of communicates a certain level of attention and focus, and I think it's a helpful way to prevent a tendency toward multitasking that people sometimes have with Zoom sessions, which is that they have the Zoom session running, but then they're also washing the dishes. And we'd really like you to be able to make some space to be able to commit yourself fully to the sessions when you're there. And having your video on is one way to show that you are attentive and present and engaged. So some other options other than just turning your video off at times if you're tired of looking on the screen is you can just turn your body away from the screen for a while, as Mary Linda McBride is demonstrating here. You know, leave your video on, but you don't have to be staring at it. You don't have to be facing it. One other tip that people on our retreats have found really helpful in regards to their tendency to gaze at their own image when they're on Zoom, I think this is a very human tendency, is to use the hide self view function. So in order to hide yourself to yourself, but not to anyone else, so it's a good way to keep your video on without becoming distracted by your own image, is you can find that command hide self view in this dot 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 menu, which appears on the screen in the top right hand corner. If you hover over your image in the participants. So for example, you just need to find wherever you are on screen, whether you're in the big box or whether you're in the little box, hover your mouse over your own image, and then you'll see that this dot 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 button appears, and you can select then hide self view. And then once you hide yourself, you'll see that there's some text that appears on the screen after that, once your image has gone away, that says something like restore self view. So that's how you get it back if you'd like to take a look at yourself again. And that's something you actually need to do every time you enter the meeting. It's not something that's done permanently through your settings. Oh, show self view. There we go. So it's underneath the view menu on the top right hand corner of the screen. So a couple of things you want to keep in mind during our online sessions when we're practicing together is that a good way to maintain focus is to close all the other applications that you're not using on your computer and actually quit out of them. Don't just minimize the windows, but quit out of the programs themselves so that there's less of a temptation to check on them and you're not receiving notifications on the screen. You may also choose to turn off or put away or at least silence your phone during the sessions completely. Headphones are a great way to avoid feedback issues and make sure that the sound quality of your voice is coming through nice and clear. Don't forget to plug your devices into a power source before each session begins. How often do we find ourselves scrambling to find a cord, with about 15 or 20 minutes left on a particular session, realizing that the computer is about to die? So you can avoid that pretty easily by plugging in every time. If you're having trouble with your video or audio, if you're noticing that there are hiccups or gaps, or you're not hearing people well, or they're becoming frozen on the screen, that can be a problem on our end, in which case everybody is experiencing it. But it could be a problem on your end. And if it's a problem on your end, indicating maybe some instability in your internet connection, here are some things you can try. Connecting with the cable to Ethernet instead of Wi-Fi, staying close to your router. And then another thing you can do is also to turn off your own Zoom video. So even though we mentioned earlier that we'd prefer that you have it on, it may be at times that you need to turn it off in order to continue to participate in the session. Again, closing other applications can help with video or audio breaking up. And then, as an emergency measure, essentially when all else fails, you can always dial in by phone. And dialing in by phone, it allows you to take part fully in the retreats. And you can also mute and unmute yourself on a phone line as well as raising your hand. So a couple of commands there. *9 is for raising your hand, and *6 is for muting and unmuting. *9 for raising or lowering your hand, *6 for muting and unmuting. Any questions? Since this is a recorded presentation, I'll just encourage you to email us at virtual@southerndharma.org, which is the email address that you've been receiving your specific retreat communications from. So the welcome email that you received for the retreat came from virtual@southerndharma.org. Feel free to email us if there's anything else you'd like to know, and otherwise, we wish you a deep and meaningful retreat experience.